back to another week in the studio, or if this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome to Art Life. This week is going to be all about me painting this new painting I've got, which I've had in the works for a while. I'm going to talk through my process, how I get to this stage, and just share with you my week in the studio.
I'm Jessie. I've been a full-time artist for 10 years and thought it about time I start sharing my painting techniques and adventures. Subscribe to join me every week for a window into my art life.
So this is really exciting for me to share with you guys because personally, I'm finally seeing some progress in my painting. It has been a long time coming. So much of what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks and even months has been research, sketching ideas out, not liking something, having to start again from scratch, which is of course normal for art kind of practice. But I'm finally doing something which genuinely is I find fascinating, which is challenging myself, trying new techniques and skills with oil painting, partly because of Art Life, which has definitely pushed me as a painter. So I have progressed in that front, but more than that, I am finally arriving into a point with my landscape painting where no longer am I just relying on my skills of painting atmosphere and smoky, beautiful paintings. I'm actually pushing myself to be slightly more figurative. And by that, I mean include a narrative into what I'm painting, which is where it gets interesting because in this new painting I have got planned, I'm going to have little symbols and extracts of landscapes which mean something to me. And you guys probably know what I'm going to talk about because a lot of what I'm going to put in this new painting I have referred to in Art Life episodes. So stay tuned, I'm going to go get everything ready. I'll share with you little clips about what I've been doing in the week, and hopefully by the end of this episode there should be something interesting, at least a beginning of a painting which I can be proud of. Book Club, as you know, has woven itself into a few episodes, so I thought why not do it now while it's in my mind. So my book of the week is Landscape Oil Painting by Suzanne Brooker. It is actually my sister's book. I've nicked it off of her and she keeps asking for it back and I'm like, I think I've lost it. But it's actually just really, really helpful for me at the moment because it's so helpful for breaking down the elements of oil landscape painting, approaching it from a complete beginner's perspective. It can break down the compositions, colour palettes, terrains, techniques for doing forests, building up cloudscapes, which brings me to why I found it so helpful this week. I was finding with some of my own cloud paintings that I was doing over the last year, they can be quite dramatic and stormy and bulbous. And I was just kind of like perusing the pages and I came across this picture, which I copied, and I basically broke down the colour palette into sort of 7 simple colours. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about, how sometimes if you come across something which engages your mind or you're inspired by, whether it's a photo or a famous painting, a little transcription like this, it just took me 15 minutes, can really help you refine your own skills, and sometimes it just gets you out of your head. So copying is actually not as bad as most artists think. It's so taboo to don't copy my work, don't, it's actually the highest form of flattery. I've had it with a few people copying my work in the past when they were students at school, and I always really encourage that because it's so inspiring to see people who like your work and want to learn something from it. But just in doing this little kind of copy from Suzanne Brooker, I found that I love the simplicity and the kind of basically really simple palette, just one horizontal cloud, and that was it. It was so minimalist. I found it really refreshing. As I was having my tea in the morning, just doing this little sketch, it inspired me to continue the day not overworking painting, simplifying my cloudscapes. So the painting I'm going to do this week is a tapestry of lots of different ideas that I've had about the landscape in this part of the east coast of Suffolk, which is known for its big skies, beautiful estuary walks, flat beaches. And it's winter, so the light colour palette I'll be choosing will be slightly cooler than maybe something I would start in June. But I went to the drawing board and I started with some arche paper and created essentially what is a diptych, which means 2 paintings as part of one kind of whole composition. If I did this in 3, it would be a triptych. Traditionally, diptychs and triptychs were panel paintings or ways of telling a story in different sections, the beginning, the middle and the end. When we went to the National Gallery a couple of months ago, we saw an amazing double diptych, 4 paintings. I don't know if that's called a quad tick. I'll have to research that, where it was different times of the day looking at the same landscape. It was kind of like morning, noon, afternoon and evenings, and in separating them into 4 kind of vertical compositions rather than just landscape compositions, and having them in the vertical form, you react to the composition you're painting differently. So half of the painting, when you kind of have this ability to remove it, it's almost like together they are amazing, but they also work independently and separately as paintings as well. So it's just a kind of interesting experiment to see how I painted with a vertical canvas rather than just always working in the landscape horizontal format. And when I'm painting on thin, narrow canvases, I definitely do make different decisions with my brushstroke. I don't waste the space. I make sure that every brushstroke I'm using has purpose and is going to be helpful towards the composition. So more of that later. I began with the Arche paper study, again bringing in experiments I'd done, just sketchy canvases from some of my research, looking at the colour palette of winter, and then I thought, why not piece together this kind of woven idea of lots of different landscapes. So you can see from the Arche study that I do my usual experimentation with colour palettes, mixing different colours and seeing what I think will be the most appropriate mixes for the oil for this composition. In doing this, it also helps me not to deviate too much from my colour palette. If you add too many colours, if you mix loads of them together, sometimes you can get a rainbow of colours, and I think something's lost. With a more muted, simple palette, often I think the composition and the simplicity of the painting can really shine. So I've just kind of stripped back the palette, and of these kind of maybe 20 colours for this painting, I'll probably only use maybe 10. Again, I did all of these little studies, and these will be really helpful in bringing together the idea of this final painting. But not only that, thinking about how over the last couple of weeks I was doing research into different artists I love. This is Arnold Böcklin's Isle of the Dead. You can check out that episode we did on Art Life if you haven't seen when I do this study. Again, I was just stripping back the colour palette, seeing what colours I could find useful. So I was thinking of doing these cypress trees from the Isle of the Dead in the kind of misty distance of this painting here. So I'm going to simplify the composition and have this in the very far reaches of the horizon in the painting. I was thinking of this tree here, inspired by some of my favourite artists, and also include some of the trees that I've done from sketching around Suffolk, again in previous episodes that we've done. So maybe I could paint this tree just down here. Over here is Sutton Hoo. We've talked about that in a past episodes, basically when the Romans occupied East Anglia. This is before the pagan queen Boadicea or Boudica rose up and kind of challenged, she's a bit of a local hero, some of the Romans when they had invaded England to expand the Roman Empire. This was a kind of ancient pagan burial site, so this is where we walk Finn most days, so I'm going to paint that in this side of the kind of composition. Quick studio break before I get back to painting. I'm walking Finn and I thought this is a landscape which would perfectly represent what I've been talking about in the studio. The bank over there is going to be in the composition. I think this lovely kind of low light would be quite handy to create the atmosphere of maybe the light hitting the water, although it is low tide at the moment. So Rafe and I have been living here about 6 months now. I've been painting in this studio for about 4 months. And about 4 months ago, we found a diptych, which we fell in love with. It was similar to the kind of Constable Gainsborough era, sort of beautiful gilded frame. It just felt like a very tranquil pastoral idyll. This is actually from one of the books I've been reading in my spare time. This isn't an art research book. It's the English Pastoral and Inheritance by James Rebanks. And it is such an exquisite book. I highly recommend it if you just want to have a bit of escapism, and the descriptive way it kind of talks about nature is something that really captivated my imagination since living in Suffolk. And reading this book, it's not part of the whole book club, read this art book to be inspired by art. This is something that actually inspired my idea of what the English Pastoral is, which to me is this sense of returning to a simplified nature, almost the beauty and simplicity of idyllicism in the English traditional landscape. And I'm kind of referring to this in the colour palette choices I was using, these soft grey blues and sappy greens with maybe only a hint of bright colour in the sky. That to me is what the landscape is at the moment. It's misty and slightly pagan. It doesn't feel very bright and hot and summery. It feels full of kind of change. Every 20 minutes the light's changing at the moment. If you get up early enough, you can see the mist rising over the water. If I did get up early enough, I would video it for you and have it here as part of the video, but I haven't done that yet, but I will. So yes, I think we will include some swans, because I like the swans in the painting that we got from the antiques market. There was just something about that which made me feel dreamy and romantic, and this idea of living in the country, which it does exist. It's not that kind of, historically it was much quieter before we had phones and technology, and I want to make this painting slightly antiquated. I want there to be maybe evidence of the Roman occupation of England, maybe, you know, with the idea of the Isle of the Dead in the background. Let's make this composition a journey into another world, both the past and a space between spaces. I think I'll paint it in my traditional style of landscape, but even as I'm talking to you, I'm just bouncing ideas around. I like the idea of jigsawing some drawings I've done, some of my favourite paintings, some of my favourite places, some of my favourite times of history, which I've researched since kind of living here. Let's just marry it all together and make a very kind of whimsical painting. It's going to be a whimsical diptych. This project is really a project for indulgence. It is me throwing myself into everything I love, and it's going to make me happy, which is why I'm doing it. I want also to have almost like a memory from the last few months immortalised in this diptych. So I'm really excited to do it. I think there's lots of different aspects to think about. The main thing when you're creating an imagined landscape is making sure that there's enough realism with this perspective to make it make sense. Rafe and I was sketching last night. Well, I was sketching and then Rafe was telling me what was wrong with my sketch. As I was putting in different sketches, he was like, well, no, that doesn't make sense, because why would there be like a kind of tree that big, you know, if the trees are only this big, as you know, as distance you get, things that get further away, they get fainter and smaller. I had all these problems. Trees were too big, things were too bright. So trying to make this composition look realistic, that's all going to be down to perspective and how bright and soft I use my colours. And this is the more practical, technical sides of painting something which feels like it makes sense. And I want this to make sense. This isn't a surrealist painting. It's not a kind of strange Dali-esque landscape of weird symbolism and melting clocks or whatever. This is going to be somewhere you can explore and inhabit. Basically, I want it to be a journey for myself, drifting along the water, seeking some inspiration. And that's what this painting is going to be for me. So it's about time now that I start working on the big canvases, beautifully stretched oil on linen these are going to be. I think it's important to say as well that for the first time painting the top half of the painting, I didn't actually reprime over the white canvas with a kind of bold ground of maybe sienna or raw umber like I usually do. In all the paper drawings I did, I started to fall in love with the way that sky blue hit the white colour beneath. So the white canvas for this one painting felt like actually it would help me, not hinder me. I just went with it. I didn't try and get rid of the white. I almost used the luminosity and brightness of it as a way to make sure my whites really popped, that my sky blue mixes felt really crystal clear, which I wouldn't have been able to do if I'd have done a very heavy base colour, which I will do for the bottom half of the canvas. So by now I've worked out a few different elements of the composition. I've got the skyline, at least to this level, which I like. I will be working into this for many months. This week is mainly just about getting in the rough idea of the composition and making sure I feel that it makes sense as a landscape to inhabit, but also that there's a lot of way I can build up the layers over time. I'll be doing lots of thin washes of layers, not too heavy with the mediums. If you watched last week's medium episode, you'll see that fat over thin is a method of painting where I don't want to add a lot of heavy paint in these early stages of the drawing, because then I won't be able to work into the painting without eventually the paint cracking. So lots of thin washes of paint, not too heavy, and then as time goes on I will be building up with a lot richer mediums and maybe lots of impasto, lots of gloopy paint. Something that also is really exciting, I can see this drawing behind my head of the boats with the shimmering, glistening water. I love the way light hits water and almost makes it glisten. So if I can with this painting, I will try and make sure that there's a little patch of the water which is glistening in the light. Although I don't have a direct sun in this painting, there isn't an obvious ball of light. So I'll have to kind of be a bit inventive with how I show light moving across the composition. I'm working with both paintings at the same time because then I was thinking if I do them one at a time, the colours will slightly be different, whereas if I almost treat it as one colour palette for two paintings at the same time, all the way along the painting, the composition and the colours, the atmosphere should be the same. I have enjoyed just kind of sketching in this kind of treescape with the water, the misty background. Again, it needs to dry and it can build up over time, but I think we've run out of time for now. I'll just finish this last little bit of just washing in the colour. I'm pretty happy with where I'm going with it. If anything, the execution of the painting itself is now quite straightforward. I can just play with the colours and build up the layers of oil and glazes. It's going to be really fun. The hardest bit for this painting was deciding what to paint. So in that sense, we have a victory this week. So thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Art Life. I hope you've enjoyed the insight into this part of my practice, which I don't normally talk about in this much detail, but I like the idea of dissecting different parts of my research and practical application of painting and bits that go wrong and just sharing it with you. I hope it just maybe helps you with your own practice, or even if you're not an artist, you might find it interesting. So please like and subscribe, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at JessOliverArt if you have social media, because I actually find it easier to respond to people if you message me on my Instagram, and also I like sharing with my stories different things I'm doing in the day. That's all for today. I'm going to keep working on this and I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching, and catch you later. Bye.